somewhere along the way, the word trauma became the word we reach for.
It's overused.
Yeah. Whenever something hard happened.
Anything that's challenging is now labeled trauma.
And that's not true. But we look at like a difficult childhood, a bad breakup, a boss that made us feel small. And look, these things, they're hard. They're difficult. There's a lot of things in life that are hard and difficult.
Most things.
Yeah, most things are difficult to deal with, but and they leave marks, right? And these are things that shape us.
No,
but they and none of that. It's not nothing.
It's not nothing. It's the problem is, I think, with trauma, for those people who are traumatized in the clinical sense, meaning they experienced something that was so overwhelming that their nervous system couldn't handle it. For those people who grew up with, serious violence, excruciating violence, gratuitous violence, really intense disasters, accidents, those people, the danger here is that people who go through those kinds of experiences start to wonder, does this word apply to me? Did I really go through something like that? If you having a shitty boss is equated to me having a life-threatening car accident,
it takes away from that. Yeah, it takes away from that word. It almost takes away from the value of the word trauma.
Exactly.
Right. We get the experience gets a little lost in trying to figure out the definition and applying it to everything. So I think today what I would love to address is, how overused and underserved that word and the populations are. As we continue kind of, last time we talked about the overuse and misuse of boundaries.
Right.
And today we're going to talk about trauma. The maybe overuse and misuse of that word everywhere.
Social media has definitely contributed to
Once
it.
Again, social media contributes to it.
Because I think social media, many channels would have us believe that anything we go through is trauma. We're having a trauma response.
Right.
And, I would love to just be a little bit more precise. Because, we're committed to busting jargon, but we're also, I think part of that is just being, okay, this is specifically clinically what this term means. This is what it means in a practical, real world sense. And so hopefully listeners can just be empowered.
Absolutely. In understanding the meaning of these words and maybe having a different relationship with that.
Yeah.
And how they apply.
Exactly. But it's not like we're gatekeeping suffering here. It's not like we are trying to determine, okay, well, your suffering doesn't count as trauma. Mine does.
Right. Yeah. No, that's definitely not what this is. Hard things are hard.
Yeah.
Full stop. Right. End of sentence. Then we have the spectrum of, well, this is hard. And then here's something that was traumatic. Here's something that has lingered, in my mind or in my body for years or since it happened. And that's I think going to be one of the distinctions we can get into. So
absolutely.
This is a conversation really about precision because the clinical concept of trauma is specific. It's well researched and it's genuinely useful. And when it gets stretched to cover all of human difficulty, two things happen that are worth examining. People with serious trauma histories lose the language about that experience, as you were saying, and people with ordinary pain get handed a framework that might actually make things harder rather than easier.
Yeah, there is, because if something is challenging, difficult, painful, but not traumatic or traumatizing, and I mislabel it as traumatic, or I'm told, oh, hey, you went through trauma, then my resilience is compromised. Because I think there's a difference here that we should probably distinguish between, hey, I went through something that was traumatic, and saying I am traumatized and having that be my identity.
Tell me a little bit more about what that difference is?
The difference is, if I label myself as traumatized, I'm traumatized by that. I'm a trauma victim. I'm a trauma survivor. To a certain extent, that becomes your qualifier for existence. That becomes your identity.
Right.
And the potential issue with that is it rules out getting better. It rules out resilience. It rules out being something other than traumatized. Again, it's really, there's a great reward in our society for identifying ourselves with hard things that we've gone through, with suffering. We think that this will keep us safe. We think that this will maybe benefit us. And, it's the same sort of idea, the same thinking behind, we don't, nowadays in mental health, we don't say, oh, that person's autistic. We say, this is somebody living with autism. This is somebody who's on the autism spectrum disorder.
Right. Person first, then issue.
And I think with trauma, it's a similar thing. There's a wonderful book that Oprah Winfrey has done a lot to promote, and she co-authored it, What Happened to You? And it draws this, it makes the same distinction that we're talking about here. It's not that I am a victim of, childhood sexual abuse. I experienced childhood sexual abuse, and I'm a person who's also a therapist and, me, for example, and a singer and a dad and, a purveyor of strange and exotic clothing. So, it doesn't limit the identity to the pain.
That's right. And I think that's where we can get caught up. And I think you brought up this interesting point before that I was kind of lingering on in my mind as you were talking. I was paying attention, but
I'd go on.
But I was thinking about, I was thinking about this thing you said. It's like the identity we end up holding on to, and it becomes the thing that we define ourselves by. And, generally in the work we do, that's kind of a dangerous idea, right? It's a harmful idea. And I think what we need to look at is that, like you're saying, the big picture. What are all of the pieces that make up, ourselves as a whole?
Right. And
when I think of like the narrative approach to therapy and just kind of what is our story, how are we writing our story as we go? When we hold on to one negative thing, and this goes back to when we talked about negative thinking styles and just kind of like the repetitive, unhelpful thought process that we have. Like, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. Like those things going through our mind, this contributes to it. And I think if we mislabel, or this is where it becomes that thing where it gets harder rather than easier, is if we mislabel something or misappropriate this thing, it makes it harder for us to feel like we actually have a chance.
Exactly.
And it keeps it actually pre-writes our story for us. And that is what we want to avoid.
Right.
When I think of like the narrative approach, and I love this approach of, hey, all of the chapters written so far, there could have been some really, really awful chapters. There could have been some whack stuff that happened in the pages up to this day.
Right.
But we're writing each day as we go. So if we're really truly living in the present, we have the ability to write each day as we go. And we can reference the chapters we've written and the pages we've written and the sentences, and even down to the minutia, down to the words. But we still have an ability to write the rest of the story differently as we go through. And that's what we want to do. We want to set the table and the stage to actually write something different.
Exactly. And to write something that isn't painful, and that as I keep saying, using the word resilience, however we can promote it.
Tell us what resilience is again.
Resilience, as I define it, would be, or as the way I use it, is our ability to overcome whatever our circumstances are that are challenging, that are limiting. So an example of someone being resilient is you go through a terrible plane crash. You survive it. You think, I'm never getting on a plane again. And then you find yourself in a few years maybe in a position where you actually do have to travel by plane. It's an emergency. There's no way out. And by doing whatever work necessary to overcome those fears and that story, as you mentioned, of what happened in the past, and to believe that, okay, just because that happened once doesn't mean it's going to happen again. That's resilience, being able to get on that plane and travel by plane after surviving a plane crash. That's one example. That's pretty basic.
Yeah. That's perfect. It's like this idea. It's like a force field around us, right? It's this ability to weather through difficult times.
Yeah.
Right. So let's go back and talk about clinically what
trauma is.
Yeah, exactly. And so trauma is, when we have an experience that overwhelms our nervous system, and it overwhelms our nervous system's capacity to process it. So it's not just something upsetting. It's actually something that exceeds the window of what we can actually tolerate and metabolize and process in real time.
Right. Dissociation is a perfect example of that. Like, what does that look like in the real world? Say you are a child and you are being terribly physically abused, and you actually leave your body because there's no way, if you stayed in your body, you could tolerate that level of pain.
That's your nervous system actually like checking out. Just saying,
your nervous system
can't
is
do
like,
it.
yeah, this is the only way we can survive here.
Blacking out when drinking is actually a similar thing. It's your brain's automatic safety to say, can't handle all the alcohol coming in. We're going to shut off everything now. And just, it's like just the systems to survive go on. And that's it. But yeah, I think of it the same, in a similar, like it's your body's automatic like defense and survival system. So I want to think of the nervous system like a container, right? So it's ordinary stress can fill it and it empties, and then trauma overfills it in a moment.
It spills.
Yeah.
And then whatever spilled is left on the floor.
Yeah. For us to slip on.
Right.
And step in and soak our socks.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think of like this, I use this reference when I talk about anxiety a lot, which is the idea of, we have a bathtub, and if you fill a bathtub to the point of right before it overflows, it has that, and I forget what the phenomenon is called when the water actually exceeds it gets that like skin over it. And so you can fill out an entire bathtub with all your stressful events, everything that's happening to you throughout your life, throughout your day. And all it takes to overflow an entire bathtub is one drop. So you can take an eyedropper and just drop that right on the edge of the bathtub, right where that kind of edge of that skin on the water is. Right. And all of a sudden way more water comes pouring out of that bathtub.
That's crazy.
It just takes it. Yeah. You can try it with a cup. Even. Yeah. It's not going to be just a drop that overflows. It's going to break that surface tension. Right? It's all those molecules holding tight. Our nervous system's the same way. It's like that container filling up, and we do things kind of to self-care to empty it. But if we're at the brink and that trauma comes through, it's going to all of a sudden flood and splash over.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I've been talking about, the example I just gave was like single incident trauma, which is where we have an experience that overwhelms our nervous system, makes the bathtub overflow, but it's like a single incident. It's an assault. It's an accident,
a natural disaster.
Right. It's like one event, and then there are other types of trauma,
more complex,
that are complex. Developmental trauma is another word for it, and this is something that's repeated, prolonged. Sometimes it's not as intense as, I think about, like, I was in 9/11. I was down there for 9/11. So when the tower fell, I was down there. That was a single incident trauma. And then complex developmental trauma, being neglected by a caregiver on an ongoing basis for several years. You're not necessarily going to have an acute response to that, although you could. But over time, it does traumatize the person.
Well, we talked about this with shame, right? And how low level or lower level consistent trauma or neglect or experience can contribute to different kinds of experiences later on in life. Right. How it kind of shapes our personality. We get shame, people pleasing, all those things that we've talked about, at times. And so, this is really an important distinction between the two different kinds of trauma. I think, and I've talked with people a lot about this. I think as human beings, we are much more well equipped to deal with single event traumas.
Yeah.
I think because we can look at it, we can define it, we can say, this thing happened, here's how it hurts me. What do I need to do to get through this? How do I make sense of this so that I can move forward in my life?
Right. It's almost like it's cleaner.
Yeah. I think of a clean cut, right? You always want it's something that's like, you can stitch it, you can let it heal, you can work on it. There's a defined problem.
Right.
And it doesn't make it less important. It doesn't make it less traumatic. It doesn't make it less hurtful, but it does, it almost makes more sense in our minds as humans. Right. That complex trauma you're talking about, that kind of developmental low level, I think of like domestic violence a lot of times. And like, that's just it's that consistency where you start to doubt yourself. Your resilience really wears away.
Right.
And your ability to tolerate any discomfort then really kind of gets picked away at.
Right. And it's easy for, I think, an outsider to say, well, if you didn't experience that single incident trauma, then it's not trauma. But, we have so many examples of complex trauma being experienced by somebody, a child, for example, growing up in a household with, as you said, domestic violence or neglect or alcoholism, like some, alcohol abuse.
Or just anger. Just rage. Dealing with other people's anger.
Yeah. And that, as you say, has an effect on the development of the personality and the coping mechanisms. And it usually wears down the coping mechanisms. I think that we talked about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
These are all examples, this complex trauma, developmental trauma. ACEs are so insidious because they basically block us from being able to, or they lower our potential for having resilience.
Exactly.
Healing, for rewriting the narrative.
Yeah. I want to add another piece in here, and this just kind of stuck into my mind really quickly. We work with a lot of people who have attention deficit disorder.
We do.
And other learning issues. And I think when we talk about co-occurring mental health issues, I think the field kind of looks at substance abuse and mental health. I really think the true co-occurring mental health issues are learning issues and mental health issues, because one typically leads to another.
Yeah.
And I just want to flag this because you said something about like this, when we started talking about like anger and the experiences of like developmental trauma and complex trauma, when we think of kids who have learning issues and they grow up in their home and, the parents are kind of constantly interacting, it's easier to navigate. Once a kid goes to school, they suddenly, even if they're not kind of picked on or highlighted as being different, but if they start to think and they look around and they start to see that maybe they don't color in the lines the same way, maybe they don't read the same way as the other kids in the class, that's also this kind of like complex, low level experience that can lead to a bigger trauma.
Right.
And because it starts to lead to this feeling of being other and not being okay and not fitting in, and it starts to define that person as something else. So I don't think we usually think of that as a low level, consistent or complex traumatic experience, but I think in many cases it can be.
That type of comparing and despairing, that type of comparison that somebody with a learning difference,
because it's quiet,
their peer group.
Yeah, because it's quiet and it's there's no word for it.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is that it's an experience, and it's a painful experience that can overwhelm. And I think of like just how painful, even as most adults, and we've talked about this, the being othered, the not fitting in. But you think about like a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
If they're,
it's going to hit hard.
It's going to hit hard, and they don't have the vocabulary or the ability to identify what it is.
Right.
And that becomes that's where if you can't say what it is, that actually leads to more of this traumatic experience.
Right.
Because you don't have the ability to name it.
That's a huge part of what I think constitutes trauma. Even going back to the clinical definition, where it's overwhelming. The nervous system is overwhelmed by whatever the experience is. That in and of itself is also a version of not being able to name something.
That's right. You can't fit in. You don't have the processing ability to make it work. And then you're alone and you're stuck there.
That's the thing. Yeah. It's really, it's so damaging. And to label ourselves as such. This is, I'm traumatized. I have, learning differences. I have ADHD. I'm, I'll never get over this. I'm always going to need extra support. I suck.
Yeah.
I remember going to grad school. I was a really good student. And then I bombed a test. And the professor was like, what's going on, dude? Like, you're so on it. You're such a good student. Why did you bomb this midterm? It was a final. Why did you bomb this final? And I said, I don't know. He's like, everything. I said, I ran out of time. I got freaked out.
Yeah.
And I froze. And he said, is there a history of that? And I said, yeah, when I was starting as a kid, generalized anxiety disorder and also situational anxiety around test taking. It started when I was 10,
really
11 years
common,
old.
right? Yeah.
And I thought I'd grown out of it. And I hadn't been in school for decades when I went to grad school. So I explained this to him and he said, makes sense. Every answer you got right.
Yeah.
But you only got through half the test. If you had gone to the Office for Disability Services, I would have been able to give you more time on the test.
Simple fix, right?
Really simple fix. Right. So, you can bet your ass I called the Office for Disability. It was too late for that class in that semester, but for the next semester and the following semesters, I registered. Yeah. And again, I could have viewed that situation two different ways. Yeah. I could have viewed it as, I suck, I fail, I am always going to have this kind of anxiety and I'm therefore never going to succeed. Or deal with it as, okay, this was a bit of a setback and there's a solution for it. And going forward, I won't have to bear the consequences of that suffering. I'm not alone.
Yeah.
I can ask for help.
You can ask for help. There was a word for it and somebody helped you with that too.
Yeah.
I want to get into that, the people who help. And there's another kind of trauma that I think we talked about, that single event. We talked about the complex trauma. There's vicarious or secondary trauma.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this. We had this wonderful conversation with Kat about grief and loss, and she referenced vicarious and secondary loss as well. And this happens with trauma too. And we see this with people who are consistently exposed to other people's trauma.
Right.
And that would be us. Therapists,
first responders,
caregivers, anybody really in the caregiving field. And it's real, it's documented, and it is definitely worth naming, especially for anyone who works in a helping role, even if their job isn't a helper. Right. Even if they're not a social worker or a therapist or a first responder, if you're just taking care of someone who's sick or a loved one or someone who has some kind of medical issue, when you think about what you are exposed to as a helper,
right,
that can really contribute to trauma.
And what does that look like? That secondary vicarious trauma? How does it show up?
It's going to show up, I think, as exhaustion. We start to burnout, exhaustion, depression, anxiety, feeling. Think about the feeling when you're working with somebody you don't have the answer, or you can't fix, or it's just there's something in front of you that you don't have the ability to make it stop. Those are the kind of feelings I think about just being as a therapist, like the consistent conversations and just kind of input of really difficult things. Right. And that can be a spectrum of difficulty. It can be like, hey, I had this interaction today, or the anger, or all the way through hearing just about other people's horrible experiences, it's a weight. You feel it. It's a weight on your chest. It's a weight, and you feel that pit in your stomach. And over time, it works much like that complex trauma where it wears down on you. It wears down on you, and it leads you to feeling more, or you're more prone to bouts of depression, maybe dysphoria, sadness,
shutting down,
trying to protect yourself.
As if the trauma has happened to you.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to not take that on yourself.
Yeah.
Right. You're filling your bathtub with, your bathtub with other people's like really awful experiences.
Right. That's so interesting. I had a friend comment not too long ago, ever since you became a therapist and like, you are so much happier. You're so upbeat. And isn't that kind of weird? Like, aren't you like exposed to some heavy stuff? And I thought about it and I was like, I really like, Kat Hurley talked about being a grief nerd and just talking about how working in, she's working in a very difficult field.
Yeah.
Grief, loss, and bereavement. But she's like, I really am passionate about it. And if I can help people get through it, and I think that's sort of I guess that's my take as well. I'm a therapy nerd. I trauma nerd, maybe. It is enlivening.
Yeah.
And deeply satisfying to, I never liked small talk anyway. So just being able to go hard and deep.
That's right. Yeah. Let's just get there. We'll hit it.
Yeah.
Kenyon, you do so much work with body and somatic work. I'm wondering if you can talk about how trauma happens in the body.
Yeah.
For people.
I'm a big believer in Bessel van der Kolk and his book, The Body Keeps the Score. In the 70s, he created the PTSD diagnosis. And his theory, and it's beautifully sort of put forth in the book, The Body Keeps the Score. I recommend people read that, is that trauma is stored in the body. We don't really think our way out of trauma. We move our way out of it. Van der Kolk writes, if we don't feel safe in our bodies, we're not going to feel safe in our environments. If we don't feel safe in our environments, we're not going to feel safe connecting with other people. And if we don't connect with other people, it's kind of like your narrative therapy example where the story is going to be written. We're never going to connect. We're never going to get over this or build any kind of resilience. So the body remembers whatever the traumatic episode was and stores it effectively.
And so it sounds like body work is also part of trauma work. Like it has to be part of the trauma work to work through these things.
That's why I'm a huge proponent of DMT, dance movement therapy, which involves getting people to feel safe in their bodies again through movement. It's not necessarily like dance. It's not like a TikTok dance or Broadway or jazz hands. It can be, but it's mostly about like understanding that, okay, if I want to move past this, I've got to get through it. If I want to get through it, I've got to kind of get it out of my body and learn to feel, as I said before, safe and comfortable in the body, which it's a phenomenon that's well documented. We feel safer when we're moving as humans. If we're moving together, maybe eye contact and having a face-to-face conversation is tough for many of us, especially people who have experienced trauma, but walking side by side, fishing, taking a run, not having to make eye contact, but knowing that you're there next to me and we're having a conversation, suddenly that feels really safe.
Yeah, there is a safety in that.
Somatically.
Absolutely.
And somatically, I mean like in the body.
Yeah. Yeah, there's totally I'm just thinking and reflecting on times that I've been, like if I am with somebody doing those things, there is a sense of safety. It's not just the camaraderie. It is that
you do therapy that way. You do ecotherapy.
I do. I love going out with people in the woods, taking a walk on a trail. I've gone fishing with a client before, and I plan on doing more of that. If anybody wants to go fly fishing, 100% down for that. I won't be braining any fish though. Like we're catch and release.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. But no, it's a different experience. It's a shared experience that you can have where I think you get to realize that other humans can be safe.
Yeah.
The other and you can allow yourself to open up a little bit more.
Right.
That way. Yeah.
But once that experience of the nervous system being overwhelmed has occurred, the nervous system has a great memory.
Yeah.
Our bodies have a great memory, and it will hold on to that. And because again, we're always scanning for danger.
Yeah.
So that's why I think, and even basic things that are, I'm very grateful they're in the common sort of lexicon now of touching grass. People talk about touching grass, but I mean that actually is that's a sound move for somatics.
It's such good advice from and everybody's always like, okay, boomer, but that's like I thought about. I went for a long run yesterday, and out in the woods. Sunday, and I was just way out in the middle of the woods, muddy, covered with just like all sorts of everything.
Yeah,
and I actually had that thought. I was like, oh, like I'm out here touching grass. I was like, it's such a boomer thing. But
it is. But I mean, it was around before the boomers too.
It was, yeah.
I've had the incredible experience of just being able to like do long distance running in a natural environment, in like, foothills or even mountains when I lived in Colorado or Montana. And it is absolutely grounding.
Yeah.
It is so grounding because I get a sense of perspective when I'm out there in the natural world and I realize, ooh, I can't control this. I didn't make this.
Yeah.
And it's humbling, but it's also very calming.
Absolutely. I want to come back to that when we talk more about like maybe how to deal with some trauma, because that's a really good point, like getting out and like grounding and kind of forcing yourself into the environment that could sometimes be scary too, right? So I want to acknowledge that. I want to talk about big T and little t. We've heard this a lot, and especially as therapists, we always hear like, oh, that's a big T trauma, that's a little t trauma.
Right.
These are really useful clinical distinctions that we want to make sense of. So tell me what a big T trauma is.
Big T trauma is something that's undeniably traumatic. It's what most people think of, I think, when you hear that word. So it's something that happened, that you survived, that someone survived, but at great, tremendous cost. Like there's no way you could get out of that unscathed.
So when you mentioned being at Ground Zero and
for 9/11,
for 9/11, that would be, we would look at that and say that's a big T trauma.
Yes.
Here's an event we can say, obviously everyone who was, I would say arguably in the New York area, like dealt with a trauma that day.
Big time.
And that was, and because a lot of people knew people, or if you were there and you experienced that, is nobody would look at it and go, like, yeah, it wasn't traumatic, right?
No. There was an FBI. I remember the FBI agents were out in the streets, and one of them was like, had lost it, and was like, we're all gonna die. You're all gonna die. And I was like, oh, okay, we're dying. I'm dying today. Yeah. And to get through, to survive that meant I have PTSD.
Right.
I did all the preparations one does while running away. And so, that's big T trauma.
Yes.
Where there's no question.
Right.
Little T trauma can relate more to almost like the complex trauma that we were talking about earlier. Experiences that may not look so dramatic on the outside, but they did overwhelm the nervous system of the person involved. So that can be chronic, especially if we're talking about childhood, chronic neglect, chronic criticism, a parent who's emotionally unavailable. That's part of neglect. Being consistently dissed and dismissed, humiliated.
There's like no real story to point to, but it sounds like there's this consistent experience that gets internalized. And so I think it's more like the
consistency is the key. You're right.
It's your nervous system's learning something about what the world is like.
Yeah.
But you keep operating that way long after that experience is done.
Yeah, it's like death by 1,000 cuts versus big T trauma, which is like the guillotine.
Right. Yeah. I'm just sitting here like thinking, it's like, gosh. But it's so accurate. I was like, I think like a good French Revolution reference
reading
here.
the Sade will do to you. Yeah.
This distinction is important though between the two things, because I think a lot of people dismiss their own experience by comparing it to something worse.
That's the problem.
Well, I wasn't abused. My parents were just not emotionally present, or, I didn't go through, I wasn't at, ground zero. I wasn't in the towers. I was away at school, or like.
By the way, everybody who, I didn't mean to interrupt, but like everybody who's experienced something traumatic does that. That's one of our defense mechanisms.
That's right.
Is to minimize and compare, comparatively minimize. Yeah. Well, I didn't have it so bad.
I hear that almost every day from somebody that I'm working with in some way or another. That kind of, it's other people have it much worse. Other people have been through much worse. Look at the other things I have.
Right.
If I have an apartment,
first world problems.
People always say, "Oh, it's a first world problem. It's a first world." That is minimizing the experience of something that may have been really traumatic.
That's a really wonderful point, because experience is subjective. There is, there's a spectrum, but at the same time, we all, wherever you land on that spectrum, and I'm talking about privilege, I'm talking about equity. Yeah. It's problems are problems. You said at the beginning of this episode, hard things are hard, full stop.
Right.
No matter where you are.
That's right. What matters is how it was overwhelming, and whether it was overwhelming to our nervous system at that time with the resources we have. When I think about explaining, like, when we talk about like, oh, people do the best they can with what they have at any given moment. And I've talked about that last piece being an important distinction.
At any given moment.
That is the same thing with internalizing trauma. If it overwhelms our nervous system at the time we experience it, depending on the resources we have available to manage it. So, I mean, at 46, I might have a huge vocabulary as a therapist to explain a feeling.
Right.
But at 10, I probably didn't have those words to use. Right. So now I can explain it. I can have an experience that be like, okay, it might not have the same impact as when I was 10 or 8 or 15 or 25.
Yeah.
So we want to think about like what resources we have available in that moment too.
No, that's important.
So when we think about recovery, like, in a significant amount of people who, develop a problematic relationship with substances, underneath that, they're probably managing a lot of unprocessed trauma.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Often little t.
Little t.
Right? It could be big T. Big T is like, oh,
there's
this
a lot
bad
of
thing
big
happened.
T.
I got to go to the bar. Right? It's almost like socially acceptable. Oh, this really horrible thing happened. Yeah. I need a drink.
Absolutely. But it's been said by a lot of recovery sort of theorists that addiction, substance use disorder, whatever any of these sort of like problematic behaviors are a trauma symptom. And I think Russell Brand initially popularized that idea as well, before he kind of like moved into the territory he's in now. But he wrote a book called Recovery, and that's the central premise.
Yeah,
is that that addictive behavior needs to be understood within a context of trauma and symptomology.
Yeah. Kenyon, you talked before about the difference between I have a trauma history and I am traumatized.
Yeah.
And one describes something that happened, and the other is a story about who you permanently are. Right. And so let's go back and look at the hierarchy and kind of like, what, when we talk about trauma to cover all of human difficulty, a few specific things that happen that are worth naming. Right. So we have a problem with, the people with serious trauma histories, complex developmental trauma, assault, war, they start to wonder whether they are allowed to even use that word, as you said.
Right.
Does this word apply to me?
Because we hear things, especially on social media, like everyone has trauma.
Right. And so it's the experience becomes not that difficult or not that different from everybody else, right? And then it's that's not a small thing though when we think about it. It really minimizes the importance of people who have experienced war, assault, any of the other complex. And we haven't mentioned people coming back from war, and veterans, and I think just how tremendously underserved they still are, even though everybody talks about support your troops, like, oh, we need to be aware of like PTSD and war and the experience of that. They're still just so grossly dismissed and underserved.
Absolutely.
And especially dealing with trauma.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because most of our trauma treatments come out of research done with troops and veterans coming back from war.
As I said, Bessel van der Kolk came up with the PTSD diagnosis specifically through working with Vietnam vets.
Yeah. We think EMDR, all that research was done on vets. ART, accelerated resolution therapy, that was a lot of the work was done and research was done with vets. Yeah. And these are all related to again, physical eye movements and how the body kind of like processes trauma and where it's stored, et cetera. The other thing is, this identity trap that I think people get caught. And that's
what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Right.
Identifying with your trauma.
Right. It becomes a fixed state. Right. It's that it's I am traumatized rather than my nervous system learns something that I'm now working on to change or to update. Yeah,
exactly. Rather than saying I experienced something that was really difficult.
Yeah,
it's almost like this thing happened. I am never going to get past it.
Yeah,
it's sort of like that idea of having of being broken.
Right. One is a noun, one's a verb, I think. It's this kind of idea of like, here's my label versus here's my process. And here's what I'm working through.
It's very different to say, I am traumatized than it is to say, I'm doing trauma therapy.
Yeah.
The second is empowered. The second is related to change.
Words are extremely important. Yeah. We can't just dismiss things as semantics. I think we've talked about this when we went over negative, with the kind of negative thoughts and
the negativity,
and the unhelpful thinking styles. It's the same thing. The way we reference ourselves is important. The way we talk about ourselves is extremely important.
Right.
So, we want to work on identifying different words and how we reference trauma. Definitely.
And how we reference ourselves. I mean, we contain multitudes. We are many things. You are many things.
That's right.
I love to talk about how you're a therapist and a banjo player and a dad and a runner.
Yeah.
And a tech nerd.
An eggplant parm connoisseur.
Photographer.
We can actually get rid of all the other stuff and just talk about eggplant.
Let's just talk about eggplant parm. Let's prioritize and hierarchize it. But the thing is, and you've also been through some tough stuff. How much of our identity do we hang on what we've been through or what we love to do? I've been through some shitty stuff.
Yeah.
And I can tell you right now, the things I love to do take up a whole lot more of my life than memories and complications related to my PTSD.
By the way, not everything that hurt you rewired you.
No.
And so within this, when we talk about trauma and resilience and how we move through it, it's really important to remember that not everything that hurts us rewires us. Not everything that hurts us lingers for a lifetime. Not everything that hurts us sticks with us and changes who we are as a human. It's a reference point. It's something that happened, but it can be an experience that we transcend. It can be an experience that we kind of work through. It can just be a difficulty that we've had to navigate.
Right.
And then other times it does rewire us and kind of like has a lasting impact. But it's important. And this is where I think the issue with what I see and what you see with social media comes in, that trauma content performs really well online.
Yes, it does.
So people are getting tons of clicks because they talk about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we get tons of clicks today talking about trauma. But it's the issue becomes that everybody goes, oh, that's me. In a 30-second clip online, somebody goes, oh, that's me. It must be trauma. It must be this trauma issue. I definitely have this thing. And I think it really takes away, it changes the framework. And it changes the framework of how we think about trauma, but it's because it actually resonates with us emotionally. And I think that's why it works so well to hear it all the time. But it's not accurate. Resonance, when we have a resonance, when something resonates with us and it sits with us, that's not a diagnosis. That's just that it feels like it feels kind of like we connect with it.
We connect with it. It's familiar. We identify without, I want to be careful about using the word identify. To feel something, though, to feel something deeply is connecting. And the other part of like trauma content performing well is the same reason like there's always traffic when there's an accident, because people want to look, people want to like rubberneck. We have, as humans, we have a compulsion to look at terrible things that overwhelm our nervous systems.
That's right. I always think it's a fear of like, we're worried about what could happen to us. So
Absolutely.
We have to see.
No, it's like a vicarious thing.
If we build these identities though around social media frameworks or things that we read or hear online, without any support, without understanding context and nuance, it actually can delay the real work that we need to do. And I think that's
it can set us back for sure.
Yeah. Kenyon, let's talk a little bit about how trauma shows up.
Yeah.
It's like unprocessed trauma, like the genuine nervous system level trauma, that overwhelm, and some of the different ways that it tends to.
Yeah, because there's a stereotype that like a traumatized individual is just going to have like flashbacks all the time. Like you think of like the classic Vietnam vet or something, who from growing up in the 80s, who was like, shell shocked. And it's that's one version, but not the only version. So yeah, they're speaking to that reactivity that's sort of like disproportionate to what's actually going on in a given situation, where someone is very clearly responding, the body is clearly responding to something that's happened in the past that's not happening in the present.
Right. It has no connection to the now.
Right.
Okay.
And that's, that can often be sort of labeled as a flashback. This is the one that I see more than any other, and that's avoidance.
Okay.
Avoidant behavior.
Yeah.
Anything that involves having to deal with situations, people, circumstances, conditions, feelings, conversations that are at all related to the traumatizing event.
Okay. So that can look like anything that kind of almost that mirrors what like that event could have been.
And I'll see it. Here's an example. I'll see it. There's say there's an adult child who was not physically abused by his mother, wouldn't legally be called abuse, but definitely shamed chronically, and about, for example, his appearance. Your appearance is, you're unkempt, you cut your hair, get it, shave, whatever, like over and over and over and over, so that as an adult, when that mom calls, he shuts down, he avoids, he can't even answer the phone because it brings back all those times that his parent, the mother, criticized his appearance and made him feel less than.
Yeah. It's like this traumatic recall, right? It's always just pulling back, and then you just avoid anything that's going to even bring up any of that, that feeling again.
So that's one that I wanted to highlight. And it also stems, that also kind of bleeds into substance use disorders, because that's a great way to avoid feelings, especially if we're dealing with, traumatizing memories.
Oh yeah. And that can be either avoiding the situation totally and just retreating into substance use, or going to the thing and engaging in substance use, right? Like just
I need a drink. I can't handle this without a drink.
Let me numb myself out in the place, or let me numb myself out and not even go. Like those both things I think happen. One of the other ways I think trauma shows up is with this kind of like hypervigilance, right? This idea like our body, like we're always scanning for threat. We're always looking, is this safe? Is this room safe? You know, like we talk about the nervous system constantly being engaged, that fight or flight, like that is hypervigilance. Right. If I'm walking around always on, always plugged in, and like my alarm is constantly like on, then, you know, the car alarm's going off as I drive down the road. That's that hypervigilance. And I think that that can be a real kind of, you know, experience for people who have trauma. And I've seen that a lot. Like, there's just a general nervousness constantly with no off switch. No, there's like no ability to switch it off.
And there's a cost that we pay for being in that sort of level of high anxiety all the time.
Yeah.
It looks like the body actually shutting down, which is another part of trauma. There are physical symptoms.
Absolutely.
Of unprocessed trauma. Tension, chronic back pain is one that you hear about a lot. Stomach stuff.
Totally.
I've gone
so
to
common.
So many gastroenterologists, they don't know what's going on with me, but it's like, it's probably linked. It could be linked to a traumatic episode from your past.
Right.
Not being able to sleep, insomnia.
No, but we always want to find like, there must be some medical condition. It's like, well, it's considered medical, but it's a mental health issue, right? But it's so many people with stomach issues related to trauma and anxiety and just what they've been through. And then I think the one that we see a lot is repetitive relationship patterns,
recreating the dynamic that produced the trauma.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because and the important distinction here, and I talk to people a lot about this, is it's not bad things. We don't do them because they're comfortable. We do them because they're familiar. And people often conflate the two things. It's like, I do it because it's what I'm comfortable with. Nobody is comfortable with being in an abusive relationship. No. Ever. That's just not. But they're familiar. Right. And they might twist or misinterpret, you know, love or attention or some of these other things that are happening in that moment. But I think that's a really important thing to understand, is that comfort and familiarity are two very different things. So let's look at maybe some of the ways that we can, you know, what like genuine trauma work requires. You mentioned body-based stuff. I think trauma work isn't just about talking. It's not just like, let's talk about the terrible thing that happened to you. Often when we're doing trauma therapy, the person can't talk about it. Right.
There are things that haven't been processed yet.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, titration is an important word here, which just really means going slowly. Like if we're titrating, we're going slowly. We're approaching whatever the trauma was in little bite-sized pieces, baby steps. Your system's been flooded before. Your nervous system's been flooded before if you've been traumatized. So we don't want to flood it again.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is, for me, it ends up being kind of like body-based, you know?
You're not just going to like tell somebody to sit down and just like, hey, let's crack this open and just tell me about the entire
what happened to you? Right. What did you go through? Sometimes a traumatized
Give me all the
client,
details.
No, you're right. But maybe a client wants to talk about, you know, a client who's gone through some, let's say, assault. They don't want to talk about what happened to them specifically, but they'll want to talk about like a David Cronenberg body horror movie.
Yeah.
And then then the work becomes, let's engage at that level.
Right.
And then maybe after a couple sessions, the client will feel comfortable talking a little bit more specifically about what happened to them.
There's when I did the ART training, when we talked about how memories were formed, and we used to think that memories were just like you'd go to a library in your brain and you'd take the book off the shelf,
Right.
and you'd open it to a page, and that was your memory. And every time you would recall something, a traumatic event, even if it wasn't traumatic, but any memory, but really when we were looking at trauma, that it's just I have this event that happened. So when I take this, I'm remembering, I'm reading about the smells, the sounds, the sights, like all of our senses, like everything that overwhelmed us at that time, everything that felt awful. That's not actually how memories work. And what research has now uncovered is that every time we talk about a traumatic event, every time we remember trauma or any memory really, but here we're talking about like these things that have happened. It's your brain is recreating the scenario. It's recreating the experience in your mind. Your brain's actually pulling from different shelves to say, here's that smell. Let me pull that sight back in. Let me pull that body feeling back in. And your brain recreates the experience so that you can recall the memory. And so every time you talk about it, without actually working through it, like in a healthy way, like say with a therapist or just in a process,
right?
You are in effect re-traumatizing yourself each time. And so that's why we want to be really careful and titrate, as you're saying, like the work around trauma treatment, because we don't want to just continuously like reflood ourselves. There is no reason to overflow that bathtub again.
Right.
We can take a small Dixie cup and just keep like taking small little, eventually you'll work through it. Yeah. But that's and that's where some of these like EMDR and ART and some other trauma therapies are really wonderful, because you get to have a different relationship with that memory as you're recreating it.
Right.
And if people want to learn more about ART and EMDR, I highly, highly recommend look into it or call us and ask. I'll talk about it forever. But that's because you're recreating a memory or recreating an experience. So every time you don't lose the memory of what happened, but you do have a different relationship, and it has a different effect on your body.
It doesn't have to shut you down.
Right.
There's also, I think it's important to point out that like not every challenge we go through needs trauma therapy.
Right.
A lot of this stuff shows up. I mean, a lot of this stuff it can be grief, loss. Kat Hurley did such a wonderful job of defining all these different types of loss that we don't necessarily, associate with loss.
That's right.
Or grief. And so, some hard things just require time.
They just require time.
Example, time and conversation.
Yeah.
And
that doesn't have to be with a therapist. That can just be time and talking to somebody else who went through something like that.
A survivor.
Yeah. I think about support groups. They're so
Jinx.
Any situation or any setting where you don't feel alone and you can talk about this, and that's just it. It's, not everything needs like some intense kind of like excavation. Right. I think like we don't need to dig so deep all the time. No. Sometimes it can be really more, hey, what are we doing right now to make sure that this doesn't feel so awful when I recall it?
And sometimes that's just being alongside somebody who you trust and feel comfortable with. As you said, like a fishing trip or running or,
That's where I think 12-step 12-step groups and recovery groups and smart recovery and any of the other kind of like
recovery dharma.
Yep. And you think about even when I think about religious practice.
Yeah. It's Buddhist tradition.
Yeah. It's not necessarily the message. It doesn't have to be like, oh, you're hearing about, Buddha or Jesus or, whatever it might be. It's just you're in a place congregating together and working towards a similar goal or just having a similar understanding of life.
No, it's why concerts are similarly therapeutic.
That's right.
Or even going to the movies. Yeah. Not that anybody really does that anymore.
No.
People just stream in their homes. But having a shared experience, being around like-minded people is, I think, inherently therapeutic.